names, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Laurel Harkness. I'm the Executive Director of the Society of Outdoor Recreation Professionals. We provide leadership for the outdoor recreation profession through skill development, networking and technical guidance. This is my first Partners Outdoors, and I'm really excited to be here and looking forward to, when we have one in person for sure. Today, I'm pleased to be joined by a few of the experts in the room around LWCF and the implementation of it. So Joel Lynch, who's the chief of the State and Local Assistance Program Division with the National Park Service. Thanks, Joel. And we've got, we're doubled up from the LWCF Coalition, which is wonderful. We've got Amy Lindholm, who's the Coalition Manager and the Northeast Regional Coordinator. And we've also got Leslie Kane, who is the chair of the LWCF Coalition. So I'm going to just frame it just a little bit, and then we'll get into some details. I think we've got a compressed time frame because we seem to be running a little over today, so we'll do our best. And if you have questions, go ahead and put them into the chat, and we'll try to address those on the fly if we don't have much time at the end for Q&A. So, with that, I'll go ahead and get started. So I think you all are pretty well aware. So the Land and Water Conservation Fund has been the principal funding source to acquire land for conservation and recreation purposes since 1965. This is not a new program, and it is administered by the Park Service under the Department of the Interior. Over the history of the program, tens of thousands of grants to states and localities have been approved under the LWCF grants program for acquisition, development, and planning of outdoor recreation opportunities in the US. Grants have supported the purchase and protection of millions of acres of recreation lands and tens of thousands of projects to develop basic recreation facilities in every state and territory in the nation. In early 2019, the John D. Dingell Jr. Conservation Management and Recreation Act permanently reauthorized the LWCF Act. And in August of 2020, the Great American Outdoors Act was signed into law. And it states that beginning in fiscal year 2021, money deposited into LWCF is available for spending without further appropriation. So this translates into full funding at $900 million every fiscal year. And GAOA also directed the allocation of funding according to a 40-40-20 ratio, which means, and feel free to chime in, Joel, or anybody else, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's a minimum of 40% of the money is allocated for land acquisition by federal agencies. A minimum of 40% is allocated to all the states and territories for acquisition, development, and planning. And the apportionment to each of the states and territories is determined by formula. And the remaining 20% is allocated by the House and Senate Appropriations Committee. So LWCF appropriations have reached $900 million in only 2 years of the program's 55-year history. And annual LWCF spending has averaged in nominal terms $388 million per year. So bottom line, we're going from an average of $388 million to $900 million. And so full funding is a really big deal. We're more than double the average allocation beginning in this fiscal year. So lots of gratitude again to the LWCF Coalition for their championing of bringing about these really wonderful acts and policies to fully fund and permanently fund this program, and your continued efforts to improve the program and ensure that it is it's doing what we want it to do on the ground. So, and thanks also to Outdoor Recreation Roundtable for their work in supporting this and for hosting this conversation today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Joel Lynch to talk us through the State Local Assistance Program and the strategy for successful implementation of full funding. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you. Since we have a compressed time schedule, I guess what I'll do is kind of jump in and talk a little bit of the components of the program, but really put some context around where we are post. I always talk about this in a post environment, post Great American Outdoor Act and what that has done for us. So obviously, I think everybody understands we had a major transition between administrations, and the ramp up for that has really slowed things down from our perspective, at least internally. For where we wanted to be at this point in time in terms of standing up. The big thing for the National Park Service with the resources that are coming in, and to put some context, although in the last 5 years we had growing appropriations from Land and Water, along with growing GOMESA, which is the Gulf of Mexico Security Act, which also directs funds into the program. So we had seen growing proportions of funding coming into the program, but the passage of the Great American Outdoor Act really dramatically changed things. And if you think about it within the context of a year or 2 years to 2.5 years, depending on the amount of funds directed into the program, we're talking about $1 billion worth of investment just on the federal side. And of course, this is a matching program, so you're doubling that at least as a minimum. So for us, the National Park Service, we're really trying to get to a better place in terms of expanded organization. We are planning an organization that will likely be double, if not a little bit more, in terms of staffing. Now that we have some resources to really be able to devote to the program and focus in on certain core elements. And before I jump into that, I will say the states are also learning to deal with this new environment. I think the challenges because of COVID and budget situations, only really kind of hampered what's going on out there. So it's really it's yet to be determined how this will impact the state operations, because this is a grant program between the two, both the National Park Service, the states, the territories, and the District of Columbia. So they are challenged, but for many of the states that I've had conversations, they are doing a lot of outreach. I think there's a lot of opportunity here when it comes to the grant program overall. There's familiarity across the board, but for a lot of local units of government, there may not always be direct understanding about how the program works. So there's a lot of growth going on there as states kind of step into these larger pots of money for the indefinite future. Some of the things that we're concentrating on, as I mentioned, we've been really impacted not only in the transition from administrations, but also COVID really slowed things down. And our ability to get things processed, even from starting last year. We're finally getting back into the groove. And unfortunately, we started a new system. So we're also learning as we go on a new grant system across the department. But some of the focal points that we're looking at in the kind of near term is not just that expanded organization, but we also want to focus in on SCORP. The SCORP has kind of gone up and down over the years, mainly because and I should say, back up here a little bit, the SCORP is the Statewide Comprehensive Outdoor Rec Plan. It's one of the pillars of the legislation because it requires the states to do a comprehensive analysis of what's there, not only from the local resources, but also federal, and even in some states have private outdoor recreation resources. So that plan becomes the basis for the investments for LWCF. And so this program over the years has dwindled. It used to be that each state had their own SCORP planner, but that's no longer the case. So we really want to focus in on this. We're not quite sure what this really means, but if we're talking about $1 billion worth of investment over a 2 to 3 year period, we want to make sure that the plans are sound as we move forward from this investment standpoint. And then the other thing that we're going to be working on, I guess, more in the near future is really defining what this program is about. And that's likely to be done through our manual process to try to figure out where this program can go in terms of resources and how we're going to, what types of projects that we're going to be looking at funding and the focal points of some of these projects. Because we already now see the trend is much bigger projects, which is a great thing. So a lot of great work is being done out there. So I'll just stop there and turn it over to you, Laurel, and we'll go from there.
Bounce it right to the LWCF Coalition Friends. So yeah, let's take the time. And then I just put a note in the chat that we can run until 2:20 here. So we've got a few extra minutes. So just so you know.
Great. Well, I'll jump in first and go to Amy to add on, but I just want to start by thanking everyone, ORR, and everyone on this call for all the engagement over the 12 years of efforts that we pursued to get permanent dedicated funding for LWCF. And I think, the 12 years were certainly worth it because we got what we wanted. And I think now we're obviously able to put all those dollars into good use and hopefully see some increased access across the board. And as others have pointed out, I mean, LWCF goes to 90% of those dollars have gone for recreational access in every county, every congressional district, obviously every state and territory. So the the opportunities are really incredibly large. I think I'm covering a bit of where we go next, and the process really has not changed. Congress ensured that there was going to be some oversight with congressional review. So the president's budget has now gone to Congress, and at this point, we engage in the next process of Congress overseeing the lists and the allocations, which they have the opportunity to amend. They can shift within the parameters of that Dingell Act, which, as Laurel pointed out, is 40% to federal agencies for land acquisition, 40% to the state and local grant programs, and then that suite of state and local grant programs, and then 20% is flexible every year depending on need. So we are working right now with Congress. We have just completed a Dear Colleague letter supporting all of that effort, the Dingell Act and more. And we had, I think, 192 bipartisan members support that letter. And we currently have a Senate letter going around, so could certainly use folks' help on that. And hope to work to engage, as Joel said, thinking about the future opportunities, both within the state and local assistance program, the ORLP program, but also the suite of other 10 programs within LWCF. And I think one of the things that we've found, particularly through the map that was just done by the Trust for Public Land, which we can put a link to in the group chat, is just how incredibly connected some of these investments through LWCF have been. So a lot of time, you know, if you look at places like Sleeping Bear Dunes National Recreation Area, you'll also see a lot of the state and local projects have been invested. State parks have gotten funding in and around the national park. And Amy talked in the previous session in the plenary about Zion and Zion Trail, and how the Forest Legacy Program helped to protect the trail leading into the national park. And so what we'd like to see is an additional collaboration, and we are certainly here to help folks figure out how to better engage in the program at the ground level, because it's all locally driven. So we're hoping to do a series of webinars through the LWCF Coalition, a little one-on-one on how to engage. So I'll pause there and push it to Amy, who might be able to add a little bit more. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. Yeah, I was just going to say that after the success, after the legislative success that we've had as a broad nationwide coalition, we're really turning our full focus on successful implementation of full permanent funding. So in addition to keeping members of Congress engaged, like through this Dear Colleague letter that Leslie mentioned, you know, we are working to facilitate conversations and public outreach and education of partners who, you know, there's a really robust land trust community and a community of practitioners who do these projects, but there's also this broader community of stakeholders who are advocacy groups, who are industry folks, who are serving the, you know, specific constituencies of recreational users, who can get involved at the local level to really you know, broaden participation in the project development process. And so we want to encourage that with these webinars that we've been doing, with more resources on the coalition's website, because we want to harness all of that engagement and excitement about full funding to make sure that good projects are getting done, and that the pool of applicants for state and local grants is broad and more diverse than it's been in the past. So we're eager to work with folks on that, and it's different in different places, and the challenges often can be similar, but can differ from state to state and region to region. So we encourage folks to engage with the coalition and get involved in some of those specific conversations where we can connect people and show you where's the best place for you to jump in and get involved locally in order to push the best projects from the grassroots up to the top.
Segue, I'm going to kind of jump in on the sort of ground implementation side and kind of the roll up your sleeves. And it's just amazing to know that LWCF Coalition is a resource as those local conversations begin to happen, because I think that that's where the work is going to be going on. So I just want to kind of go through a few points here around what it will take to have effective ground mobilization, and in terms of stimulating investment at the state and local level as well. So Amy, you touched on it, just really raising general awareness about LWCF. I think it's just been kind of this really old program, is very latent though, and just like my own experience talking with my district administrator of the local recreation parks district, and she didn't know about LWCF, and so it was like, okay, well, let's talk about that. So so I think we can all do our part in having those conversations, just pointing them to resources. I put a link in the chat to where their what projects have been funded. If people have awareness about LWCF projects, they start to look around in their local communities and really understand, oh, that's right, my park around the corner is funded by LWCF, or that boat ramp, or that marina, or that whatever. And so and I think you guys have had some good examples too of local agencies actually just putting up some signage, sort of like promoting the fact that this facility that you're enjoying so much is funded by LWCF, and just very, very simple. And I think I've seen some examples of that popping up in the media. So so just general awareness. And then the other thing too, Joel mentioned the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, which is something that states have to update every 5 years. It really frames the goals and the recommendations around the LWCF program. Eligible projects have to map into the SCORP plan, we call it. And so I think just generally becoming aware of the contents of the SCORP in the state that you're doing work or business in, and getting oriented to what's in it, and starting to think about how to conceptualize and plan at not just a local level, but a region level around how to leverage the LWCF program, because this is not just a one-time, one and done grant opportunity and poof, it's gone. I mean, this is years and years of hard work, and just think about it in terms of the long term. So and I think that that's why one of the pillars of the program is planning, and the foundation being the SCORPs. But I think that regions and communities can take it one step further and actually initiate their own regional planning and partnership efforts that tie into the SCORPs, that have more regional relevance. Most of I'm from California too, so I think in terms of big state, big economy, it's a little bit different than Delaware or something like that. Not to pick on Delaware, they're very small, but I think thinking in terms of how to make this program relevant to what's on the ground in your community. And I think some of that becomes kind of tying into the raising of general awareness, packaging up a local and a regional narrative that's relevant around the value of recreation lands. As it's enough to like wave the flag and say, we've got LWCF and this is such a great program, there's so much money. But you get it's just like a really it's a state grant process. We don't want to go through. We've got other sources of funds, or they just like won't totally get the opportunity. And so I think or their priorities are in other areas, not necessarily recreation or trails or anything that may be funded by LWCF. So I think that part of it becomes telling the story around recreation lands, why it's important. I think it was mentioned too, like in the framework of conservation and other priorities around climate and nature-based investment and jobs. Think about the things that resonate within your local community, your local region, and relate them to recreation lands, and say, okay, well, this program can invest in recreation lands, but it also can move the needle on all these other things that are important to us, whether it's carbon sequestration or workforce development or working lands, you name it. But just having that conversation locally, and it's easier in some communities than others. And Amy, you mentioned that it's just it's not a cookie cutter. There's every community is very different, and so it's about starting to just sow the seeds and growing capacity at the local level, growing it out to the region level, it requires, some real legitimate work around cross-jurisdictional partnerships, getting local governments talking with state governments, talking with federal lands, and talking with all the stakeholders that are part of the outdoor recreation ecosystem within these communities. So, so if you think of the LWCF program as something that augments, a whole culture or a community around outdoor recreation. So I think LWCF is not just the silver bullet that comes in. I think that it's meant to be, something that will propel outdoor recreation access in different areas. So so it's long-term work, and in a lot of rural communities in particular, of which I am part of, there's quite a lot of turnover, let's say, in local government. There's not documented partnership agreements, that kind of thing. So, take the time as a community to, establish some of those institutional, foundational components that will be, which will provide a better, receiving point for LWCF investment, if you will. And so, so with that, I think I wanted to we've got 10 minutes left, and we've got some really great questions. And so, Jill, I'm going to pass it over to you. Did you want to drive some of the questions?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I think a good one to start with, to kind of build on what you were just saying, comes from Christopher. And how are recreation planners coordinating outdoor recreation plans, especially for trails, with statewide and metropolitan transportation plans to benefit both? If you guys can tackle that.
I'll touch on that, Christopher. I know we haven't talked in many years, but I think back in the day, when the SCORE planners were around, that was their role too, to also integrate the overall rec trail program and the planning associated with that into the SCORE, or as a separate document. They were always somewhat conjoined in many ways. So that's the kind of stuff that we really want to get back to. And I will point out, one of the last SCORE planners that long since retired now was Bob Reinhardt up in New York. And that was what whenever he got his SCORE done, he turned to the rec plan and so on, the rec trails plan. And so it was kind of this ever evolving cycle. It was a planning program, meaning they were constantly trying to work through different issues, and whatever the issue might have been in year 3 was a focal point of what they were trying to do to either identify data needs or build a system in place, or work with communities to do the needs assessments to be able to capture that information, to integrate it. So the trails is a fundamental part of that. We do fund a lot of trail type programs and related components. So I see this as just a big tent to be able to integrate a lot of that type of activity in there.
I think also
a little bit too, on planning, and in terms of aligning plans of various sorts, and I think in particular we're going to see a lot of climate resilience type plans, biodiversity plans, that kind of thing. So Amy, all yours.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that I know ORR and many other partners have been instrumental in pushing for states to adopt state offices of recreation, and they have a real role to play in acting as coordinators in that way. And I think they can really add a lot to this conversation and add some capacity in coordinating both with folks in the industry and on the NGO side, and with the different state offices, not just the, whoever the state level LWCF stateside coordinator is, but also like the state Forest Legacy coordinator and others, who are administering different grant programs. The recreation office can really look comprehensively at the whole landscape and the recreation infrastructure, and help provide some coordination there, which will be really, really helpful.
Yeah, I would echo that. And also just, there are some states that actually sort of house a lot of these programs in one office. And I think they're good examples of ways in which we can use some of the state examples out there in terms of how they're coordinating for other states to learn as these dollars continue to grow. The one thing I was going to add to this is just, Joel, maybe talking a little bit about ORLP, and that huge opportunity that is just out there with the 150 million, because I think in terms of Laurel mentioning how to get the word out, that's at least one big area that we're going to try to focus on as well, in terms of letting folks know the big opportunity that local communities have to apply directly for LWCF dollars, which is a new focus for the program.
Yeah, and for everybody's benefit, the ORLP is the Outdoor Recreation Legacy. So it's a component of LWCF. It's a separate set of dollars that have come to us, originally appropriated by Congress, and now has been a part of the distribution of funds, at least in this first year of under the Great American Outdoor Act. And those funds have, we had some seed money when we did this in 2013 or 2014 at the direction of Congress, and developed a national competitive program. We did model it after a defunct program called the Urban Park and Recreation Recovery Program, which focused in on urban areas and identifying those places and putting funds, at least in a small amount at that time, towards areas that don't have recreation. And I think our recent pandemic has certainly pointed out lots of needs out there. And that's really what the program focuses in urban areas in particular, is identifying those needs and addressing those gaps, the play deserts, if you will, that are out there. And one of the big components with the funding, that program jumped from 25 to 150 million this fiscal year. So a significant increase, which is a challenge unto itself. But one of the components that I see, having a planning background myself, is many communities, urban in particular, do not really have plans. And the old UPAR program, as we called it, there were, again, a planning component called a RAP, which is a Recovery Action Plan, which forced, or not forced, but got the cities to really focus in on where their needs were. And I think we need to go back to that kind of level of planning at that local level to help identify these areas so the funds could be directed appropriately. So we see that as an opportunity there, again, to maybe provide some resources to the states to help build those kind of capacities.
Thanks, Joel. Leslie, I want to backtrack really quick. You said you indicated that there were certain states that housed coordinated offices. Diane asked if you could maybe expand on that a little bit or use some examples.
Well, I know Washington State, for example, oversees the Forest Legacy Program, Cooperative Endangered Species stateside and ORLP. And I believe Pennsylvania does the same, right, Amy? And there may be more states. We can certainly get back to you, Diane, on that.
Some states don't house them necessarily together, but the folks know each other well and coordinate well, like in Maine. So we have been, as I said, the coalition is trying to facilitate these conversations. So we, for example, had a webinar with LWCF coalition partners up in Maine that included the stateside coordinator and the Forest Legacy coordinator and folks who were really experienced in federal side projects. And so we talked about looking across the landscape and using all of these tools. And then another example, we worked with the Friends of the Conti Refuge. The Conti Fish and Wildlife Refuge shares a border with the entire Connecticut River watershed. So that covers 4 states. And so we brought together the stateside coordinators for Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont with the 70 coalition organizations within the Friends of Conti who have directed tens of millions of dollars into the federal refuge to look at how those 3 states administer their stateside programs and how you can leverage that to, broaden the impact that has gone on the federal side by using the state level tools. So I would love to coordinate with folks in other states or regions who want to talk about going across jurisdictional boundaries that way. And looking across the program and across state lines to try and, think outside the box a little bit, think bigger now that we have full permanent funding about how to do landscape level conservation and how to reach into communities that have been unserved or underserved. I'm going to post my email in the chat so folks can definitely follow up with me, and I'd be happy to work with folks individually since it's also different based on where you are.
Thanks, Amy. I know we've got just a couple more minutes. One of the other questions that was posed was from Anne. How has emphasis changed from long ago in SCORP that previously focused on tennis courts and ball fields per capita to more dispersed recreation?
That's a good question. I think it was really the planning approach. If you look at the LWCF Act and you read the planning requirements in the Act itself, it's a very supply demand driven type model of planning, which was done back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But largely the National Park Service has encouraged the states to kind of move away from just counting and doing relationships ratios between numbers of people and types of facilities, to be a little bit more strategic and again thinking kind of outside of these realms about what are the real needs and how things can be coordinated even and across different programs as well. So we don't really have that emphasis on counting things in relationships to per capita, which were produced by NRPA and some others that really came out of the ORC reports back in the 1960s.
So, okay, we've got about 2 minutes left here. I don't know if anyone else has additional Q&A that they can pop in the chat. Otherwise, does anyone have final comments or feedback they want to give as we're looking to wrap up?
It's an exciting time to be involved in this great new opportunity we have out in front of us.
Sure is. Thank you, guys.
Enthusiastic about this because the scale of this is pretty big now. So and I want to give props to the SCORP planners out there in the state. I think that there's a couple of them on the line here, so they're doing some real hard work getting everything in order and implemented at the state level. Thanks, Jill.
These are really complex projects, but the opportunities are definitely worth it. So it's exciting.